Than 700,000 people die by suicide every year globally, according to the World Health Organization, and 50% have no prior mental illness.
A new study is being launched at UW-Madison. Researchers are looking to improve well-being and prevent suicide. NBC 15's Shana Najawan talked with Dr. Richard Davidson, the founder and director of Center for Healthy Minds and a co-investigator of the new study.
Mark Lee, Dr. Davidson tells me while there have been ongoing efforts to improve mental health, many scientists and practitioners have contributed to, current approaches haven't even made a dent in the ongoing mental health crisis.
What our evidence so far suggests is that we can actually learn the skills of well-being.
Dr. Richard Davidson says their new study will combine meditation and neurostimulation in an attempt to improve people's well-being.
If we can boost the capacity of the brain to exhibit plasticity and at the same time teach people simple meditation strategies to improve their well-being, it's kind of like a double positive whammy.
Participants will meditate by day, while neurostimulation nudges different parts of the brain at night.
Neurostimulation during sleep is hypothesized to improve the consolidation of the skills that the participants are learning during the day.
The multi-million-dollar project is being funded by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
4 times the number of people have taken their own lives who were either active duty or veterans than were killed during the entire 20 years of war.
Project manager Greg Whitkop says their organization is committed to supporting warfighters and their families.
The Wisconsin team was chosen primarily because of this idea around preventing this from occurring, helping people's, giving their brains the capacity to regulate emotions, come up with different alternatives.
All involved, hoping to put a stop to deaths by suicide.
If we can impact people a little bit further upstream, we can perhaps prevent some of the more serious problems that occur downstream.
Now, the study is still in the preliminary phases, but it's expected to launch at the beginning of next year. Live in the studio, Shana Najawan, NBC 15 News.